Well, y'all, it's about 11 o'clock, so I figure I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Parners for Fish and Wildlife program here in Texas. My name is Cindy Watson. I'm the state coordinator for our program here. And as Dawn mentioned earlier, all right, so our mission is to effectively achieve voluntary habitat conservation on private lands in Texas for the benefit of federal trust species. We cover there's not a lot of us, but we cover the whole state. Up in the Panhandle, we have Dwayne Lucia. In Northeast Texas, we have Missy Singleton and Steve Airy. In East Texas, we have Jeff Reed. On the coast, we have Tim Anderson, who was just up here a bit ago, and Chad Stinson. From around here all the way out to El Paso, we have Brendan Witt and Chris Chapa. So what do we do? We fund habitat restoration on private lands. Most of our projects involve brush management for grassland restoration. We also are moving more and more into riparian restoration. So I'm going to show you a couple of before and after pictures of some of our projects across the state. This is the Edwards Plateau, like I said, typical brush management, restoring the grasslands. Here's another. See, we're leaving the mature juniper trees, taking out all the second growth juniper. This is an interesting project because it's very atypical of what we typically do. This is out near Big Bend along Terralingua Creek, and we're working with many, many partners, including these right here, to restore the riparian forest. We're planting willow poles and cottonwood poles to help reduce scour during flood events. So this is a real exciting project, and we're real happy about it, and it would not be possible without the private landowner cooperation that we have out there. In the Lost Pines here, just east of Austin, we take habitat like this where pretty much nothing can get through, and we make it more usable for wildlife. Turn it into this, which grows into this. Much better for turkey and other grassland birds. Up in the high plains, the Panhandle, we'll take a monoculture, increase diversity, plant some native species, and get habitat like this. Once again, grassland birds are very happy about this. On the coast, I'm kind of jumping all over the state here. We have a project that's been with us for a long time with Ducks Unlimited. It's the Texas Prairie Wetlands Project. And I'm pleased to say I was just able to get some pictures yesterday from one of our coastal biologists, Chad Stinson. I'll show you here in just a second. Real nice pictures. So we take abandoned rice fields and things along that line and turn them into shallow wetlands for waterfowl and water birds. So this is kind of starting picture. Well, actually, yes, I removed a picture. Take something like this, put the foundation down, and what do you get? Get this. Get some pintails. There's another one. I like that one a whole lot. This is another atypical project, but we're trying to do more of these. This is near the Caddo Basin along Cypress Creek. This landowner actually won the Lone Star Land Steward Award this past year for the Piney Woods. His name was Nelson Roach, Couch Mountain, excuse me. But he has a creek that before we started working on his property, it was just log jams left and right. The water was very sediment filled. Fish couldn't use it. Turtles couldn't use it. Freshwater mussels couldn't really use it. So we went in there and cleared all of the log jams, and we also replaced a box culvert crossing with a bank-to-bank crossing you can see here on the lower left. So what that did was clean up the water. So now it's more usable for the wildlife, but also this feeds into the Caddo Basin, so it's helping the public water supply. So we're real happy to be part of that. Here's another couple of photos of that project you can see before up there on the left. Log jams. And then afterwards, it's free of log jams, free-flowing, cleaner water. So our agreements, we have two types. We have private landowner agreements and we have cooperative agreements, which Arlene and Tim are going to tell you about some of them here in a moment. So for private landowner agreements, we work with the landowner. We design and develop a plan. The match is negotiable. We do all the paperwork, so there's no burden on the landowner. You can be reimbursed all at once when the work is done or in sections as it's completed. For cooperative agreements, we work with state agencies and NGOs. We find our landowners or cooperators, as we call them, through our state agency or NGO partner. So the landowner agreement, in that situation, we call it a subrecipient agreement. So it's the same basic premise, just a little bit different path. Rather than having an agreement directly with us, it's through our agency, state agency or NGO partner. Basically, we use the 2017 EQIP rates. The match is usually 50 to 75%, depending on the species on your property. For example, if you had a focal species like the monarch butterfly, we cost share up to 75%. It's a very simplified process with benefits to the land, the landowner, and wildlife. And this is a diagram that kind of lays out the process. You give us a call. We set up a site visit. We develop a plan. We develop an agreement. You do the work. You're reimbursed, and everybody's happy. That's the ideal process. We also work on prescribed fire. That acronym there is the National Wildland Coordination Group Standards. These are the safest standards you can find in the nation. All of our crews are NWCG certified, or we work with, for example, the Nature Conservancy. They're also NWCG certified. Landowners are responsible for fire breaks, but we take care of a burn plan and the agency administrator. And this helps us reduce costs because fire is so much cheaper, as I'm sure many of y'all know, than many of the other practices we can put on the ground. And we also, thankfully, have a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to do prescribed fire on private lands. This is through our Balcones Canyonlands National Wildlife Refuge. And if you're interested in this, let me know, and I'll give you some contact information to get you to the right folks. So this is what we're about right here. Doing good work on the land for the wildlife and the landowner. So this habitat's going to turn into much better habitat, and these landowners are happy. That's our goal. We have many, many partners. This is just a few: NRCS, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, Texas A&M Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Habitat Federation. Right, Jim. Many, many, many partners. But ultimately, it's the private landowners that drive our train. As Dawn mentioned, we also have the Working Lands for Wildlife project for the freshwater mussels in the middle and lower Colorado River. This was just kicked off this past year. The state conservationist of NRCS, he put together $300,000, and I'm happy to say that $294,000 of that money has been drawn down and put on the ground. We're hoping to get more this fiscal year, but if not, hopefully next fiscal year for sure. So this is what I was talking about, the riparian management that we're hoping to move into more and more. With that, I will stay questions until my partners give their presentation, but thank you so much for your time. Sure appreciate it.
So while I load my program, I'll give a little introduction. My name's Tim Sigmund. I'm the, if I can get the mouse to show up. Oh, there it is.
We're in trouble now.
Anyways, I'll let Don mess with this and talk for a second. But anyways, I'm the Private Lands Program Leader for Texas Parks and Wildlife. The other two individuals up here, Chuck Koleski and Arlene Kalmbach, work with me. Chuck is our Farm Bill biologist. He's a liaison with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. To where if you contact your local Parks and Wildlife biologist, Chuck can give them information on the programs available in those land areas and your counties that you're in. And then the Working Lands for Wildlife program, like Cindy talked about, and other wildlife programs that are available. And Arlene works with the Landowner Incentive Program and the Pastures, Upland Birds program, PUB. And so the program that I will eventually talk about here, if we can get the computer to work, is Pastures for Upland Birds, and Arlene will talk about the Landowner Incentive Program. But essentially, the programs that we work with Parks and Wildlife, we work with landowners directly in order to try to do good work across the landscape. So the Pastures for Upland Birds program is essentially a program directed towards grassland restoration. So for those that were here for the last talk, and you heard Jim Willis and the others talk about, most of the open grasslands in Texas have been converted to either non-native grasslands or have been degraded over time to where we've lost components of our native warm season grasses, things like little blue stem, big blue stem. If you're in South Texas, pink pampas grass, a lot of your other grasses down there that are good and been replaced by non-natives from Africa, South America, things like Bahia grass, Bermuda grass, Johnson grass, tanglehead, King Ranch blue stem, and those types of things. Hallelujah. There we go. So now, with my presentation, I'll talk about the Pastures for Upland Birds program. Thank you. Yay! So, anyways, basically this program was built to work in fragmented landscapes. So if you think about areas east of I-35 where this program started, we're working with smaller landowners, and it's not changing land management that's working with native plant species to benefit wildlife. We've gone through wholesale conversion, either to row crop agriculture or to non-native grasslands. So recognizing that, we recognized there was a need to incentivize conservation because these programs to implement yourself are quite expensive. And we were working on the concept of wildlife co-ops. Interest, expertise, provide the tools, pooling manpower, and the other resources. And the way they did that was in 2001 with Texas A&M and Parks and Wildlife and AgriLife working together. They did some research plots in Grimes, Falls, and Lee County using different herbicide rates and different treatments and plantings to try to get a result. And so they were trying to figure out how do we eliminate these exotic perennial grasses. In this case, it was Bermuda grass they were normally trying to get. And provide technical and cost-share assistance to the landowners so they could have the expertise to do the practices as well as the tools. And these were mainly in the post oak and blackland ecoregions. So when they did that, they got 300 gallons donated from Dow. They've got Quail Unlimited started a part of it, National Wild Turkey Federation. There were lots of folks helping us out to get these things started. And so this was the initial focus area. This is District 5 of Texas Parks and Wildlife, our administrative region. So you see you got Dallas County there, down to pretty much Bryan College Station in the bottom in Brazos County, and then up to the Red River to give you an idea of where you're working. Basically, Tyler to Dallas down to College Station to the Red River was kind of this focal area initially. And so after they did the demonstrations to show that they had practices that could work, we got additional funding through EQIP funds from the NRCS and with Chuck's help here back in 2001, 2003, and they eventually established 15 demonstration sites across 5 different counties, kind of the south central Texas region. So beyond that, you can see in the top right, that was initially after the herbicide treatments, a straight Bermuda grass field to the bottom left. After about 2 years, a lot of Indian grass and other forbs growing in there, and much better from an upland bird standpoint, from a quail standpoint. So the funding process has evolved since then. So now, from 2009 to now, we generally get an annual budget allocation for seed budget from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Parks and Wildlife provides the landowners with the use of a Truax no-till seed drill, the herbicide to conduct the spraying, and the technical guidance on when to spray, how to spray, the rates, when to plant, how to use the drill, and those types of things. Involved in that is a 10-year habitat retention agreement with the landowner. So that doesn't give anybody access to the land or cause any other consternation with the property. It just means if we're going to help you pay for this, we'd like for it to remain in native habitat for 10 years. You're not going to go back in and convert it to Bermuda grass within that time or build a house on that area or anything, create a development or those kinds of things. So right now, in the past, we had 9 species of grass and 9 species of forbs or wildflowers that we were planting within that. This past year, we got an additional contract for an additional 9 species mix or up to 32 species mix to include that. So we're up to maybe around 42 species on contract that we can plant within that of native plants within it for habitat building. So our budget has increased as we've gotten more properties planted and successfully done. About 8 years ago, we were down around $20,000 an acre, and now we're getting allocated about $100,000 an acre to do this. So we're able to sign up roughly about 700 acres a year, give or take, based on our current seed contract costs. So this is the most recent data I have for the number of acres under contract over the last 5 years. We've kind of increased as the budget's increased. But over the last 5 years, we've impacted about 2,500, a little over 2,500 acres in the various areas that we're working in. So what does that mean? What does it mean for PUB? What does it mean for Landowners? So a good thing about having consistent source of funding and consistent programs, it builds personal experience for the biologists, so when landowners talk to them, they have personal experience implementing those practices on the ground. That's one thing Jim Willis was talking about earlier. It's one thing for folks to talk about a program. It's another for them to implement it and be able to lead you through the whole process from beginning to end. Seeing the process of how these things establish. Natives establish over time. These are perennial plants, so it's not like when you plant a cool season crop of oats or ryegrass where you plant it and 6 weeks later you have a uniform green field across the landscape. The first year is typically dominated by annuals. The second year the perennials begin to build, and by the third year they're moving through, and we'll look at some of those photos here in a minute. And then helps with the outreach activities. And so because we've had this availability, I made a 6-minute video. If you want to copy that link or that title, you can find it on YouTube that goes through the process of eliminating these non-native grasses and then planting them and that process. I have a 1-hour talk I give, and it's summarized in about 6 minutes here. And since we've done that, we've been able to get 1,893 views on that in about the last 1.5 to 2 years. And so I've given the Native Grassland talk about 20 times. I think I've talked to about 500 people. So YouTube does a good job of getting the folks, while they're sitting in their pajamas at the end of the day, just looking at their phones or their computers. It's helped in building some publications in cooperation with AgriLife on how to manage those grasslands and establish them as resources for landowners. So those are available for folks to look at as well on establishing tallgrass prairie. And then in addition to that, we expanded the operational area. So initially we started in District 5, which is that light pink area on the graph on the right. Now this program is available due to additional funding through Monarch funding through all that hot pink. So it goes all the way out to pretty much just north of Uvalde County, up through Kerr County, I think that's Cook County on the far west, all the way over to Bowie County in the northeast, down to about Crockett and Navasota, and then all the way over to Wilson County in the southeast. So pretty big. If you take I-35 and go out 3 counties either side of it, you got a pretty good estimate of what county this program is available in. So a nice thing for us is paperwork for staff is the whole application process is 1 page. It's basically you say who the landowner is, where the work's taking place, what you're going to do, and provide 2 maps of where it's happening. There's no reimbursement, no invoicing, no receipt tracking, all those kinds of stuff. So it's fairly simple. We have a continuous sign-up until all the money is allocated. So the moving parts. TPWD provides a herbicide to do the spraying, technical guidance. We order and deliver the seed to you. And if available in that area, the use of a no-till seed drill. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service provides the money for the seed mix. The landowner provides the labor or pays someone to spray and plant as directed, and there's a 10-year contract for that habitat retention agreement. So we effectively pay for all the herbicide, all the seed, the use of a seed drill. It's your responsibility to get the herbicide sprayed, plant the seed, and then keep it in that condition for 10 years through management. So through that word-of-mouth projects and so on, we were able to spark additional interest with the money from this consistent funding. This is an example of a project to combine with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners money and Parks and Wildlife's PUB program. We were able to do over 380 acres of native grassland restoration on this property in Brazos County. This property is 212 acres of NRCS, EQIP projects, and PUB projects put together for a little over 212 acres of grassland restoration. Additional things that we can do for cheap. If you look at this, Bahia grass is a problem in lots of south central Texas where you have low fertility soils or sandy soils. So instead of having to go in and do a full restoration, the experience this program has let us have. If you take a look at the left-hand side of the project, that's what the whole picture looked like. That's Bahia grass overtaking all that natives. We sprayed the right, and at a cost of about $4 per acre for chemical, we're able to restore that to much more usable habitat for grassland birds. Little blue stem and switchgrass there in the foreground. So it helps get the conversation started and fills that niche between traditional ag producers and the recreational property owner. And then we know that project cooperators want experience when they're going out there, so that's a big part of it. And that failures are oftentimes talked about more than successes when you're in a rural landscape. So it's really a message of getting out there, and we want these things to succeed and be with you. So just a few quick examples. This was a Johnson grass hay patch after historically being a corn crop. So this was in March of 2012. Pretty much all Johnson grass. That's after 2 sprayings. It's King Ranch blue stem that's still green in there that we had to spray again. That's September of 2013. After the first year of planting, it got pretty dry, so you can see there's a lot of annual sunflower, snow on the prairie, and so on. That's May of 2015. A lot of Maximilian sunflower, evening primrose, and Indian grass in that photo. July of 2015 with some of the stuff going up, a lot more structure in there from a native grass standpoint, and then April of 2016. So I was talking about that process. The first year was mainly annuals. Second year, there were a few perennials with some annuals involved. And by that third year of establishment, it's almost all native grasses with a good mixture of annuals and perennials mixed in. So it doesn't take a biologist to know that is not as good a habitat as that is for upland birds, pollinators, and so on. There's a really good example there in the Blacklands. Another example of a project we did, this was a Parners project in Houston toad habitat, but Yopon thicket. Yopon's an evergreen shrub that can dominate these sandy soils in the post oak savanna. They did some brush mulching, followed it up with some native grass planting. So this was March of 2010, July of 2010, where they came back and resprayed some of the resprouts. And by September of 2012, after planting the native grasses, we had a good diverse understory in there in those openings. So just enough, same place, different photo, Maximilian sunflower, sand drop seed, all kinds of good stuff in there. Much better from a fawn cover standpoint, coil production, all that kind of stuff. Other things we've done, this was a pipeline right away that had been disturbed, and he wanted to replant the native grasses. So we went back out there, and after we planted, it came up in rows, did really well. And so we pretty much had ready-made habitat after that disruption of that site when they put in a 36-inch pipeline through that whole area. So it rows. This was after the first year. We got some good rains. You can see the rows of native grass growing there, and pretty good distribution of bare ground and bunch grass in there, especially if you're into quail and doves and those sorts of things. In addition to that, this is one in more East Texas. First year, if we're talking about annuals, dominated by woolly croton or doveweed. But by the following spring, it's pretty much eroded away, mainly native grasses with a few annuals. And by then, you got lots of residual perennial grass and so on. So that's what it looked like a couple of years later. So just knowing that process and how it proceeds through. And then fire and so on. So just building those processes over time with these landowners. But that's essentially the Pastures for Upland Birds program in a nutshell. If you'll have any questions, you can catch me afterwards. And if not, hopefully I can pass this on to Arlene, and we're actually able to, let her talk about the Landowner Incentive Program.
Okay. Tim's already introduced me. I'm Arlene Kalmbach. I am state coordinator for the Landowner Incentive Program. Thank you. And the LIP program is another tool in your conservation toolbox. I like to tell landowners that there are a lot of programs out there, and do your best, strategize, and utilize all of them. Some, like PUB, will do very specific things. Some are more broad. Just do your homework, work with your local biologist, and do your best to strategize and think long term. Okay, so the Landowner Incentive Program, if I move, is that still good? Okay. It's a competitive incentive-based cost share program for private landowners, another tool in that toolbox. And like the Partners program, we are focused mainly on doing work in areas we've identified as high priority, specific watersheds, for the benefit of federal trust species. We also put some attention on the Texas Conservation Action Plan, highest priority species, and we have a watershed focus. Okay. But LIP is about partnerships. The biggest partner we have is the private landowners. Then it's our other agencies and the nonprofits and everybody that comes together on that property to get the work done. Today we work cross-divisionally in the Wildlife Department, in Parks and Wildlife. It's housed in the Wildlife Division, but we use resources from the Inland Fisheries Division as well. And they sit on our review panel, and they play a big role in helping us select projects. Funding comes from Fish and Wildlife Service from the Partners program. Cindy talked about that earlier, and Don talked about it in the previous group of presenters. We also get funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and we use some of the state money that comes from the Conservation License Plate funds. So the history of LIP started in 1997 to provide technical and financial assistance to landowners interested in improving habitat for rare and declining species. And that predates me, but if you want to know the history, Chuck could tell you a long story about where it came from, but it's taken a lot of turns, and it'll probably take a lot more turns as different issues and funding influence it, but it's grown significantly over the years. And it's automatically changing. And that's important in a state where, as Dawn mentioned earlier, greater than 95% of the land is held in private lands. We need to be able to partner with our private landowners to effectively manage species. So since 2005, we've provided over $3.5 million in state and federal cost share, approximately $3 million in match. It's probably a lot more than that, but for a long time we were requiring landowners to document it, and so they met their match requirement, and we don't document beyond that, but there's so much more that goes into it that doesn't get documented. So I always think there's tons more match, so much more buy-in from the landowners than gets recorded. We've partnered with over 170 individual landowners since 2005 and achieved nearly 200,000 acres of habitat enhancement. So what does LIP do? Unlike PUB, we're a little more broad, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But for the most part, we do all the same things that you heard Cindy speak about, and often we collaborate on those projects. Some examples are brush management, wetland enhancement, invasive species management, erosion control, riparian protection, native vegetation planting, and I don't know if this will work. I think I have a minute to show you. We've been trying to deploy time-lapse cameras on projects because I think they're, picture speaks volumes. Well, a little video does too. We'll see if it works. Okay. So for 2019, our funding that would apply most broadly, our highest priority are projects within identified priority watersheds that show a direct benefit to federal trust species. Okay. Is that working? It's not working for you at all. Okay, and then our next highest priority are projects that are expected to directly benefit listed or candidate species in their habitats or species identified as high priority in the Texas Conservation Action Plan. I really wish this would. Do you have any idea why it's frozen? Okay, sorry. But essentially I tell folks you may be in the highest priority watershed, you might not be, it's just frozen.
Yep. Back on the screen, just stop.
Okay. Sorry. Make your first contact with your private lands biologist at Parks and Wildlife, or your Fish and Wildlife Service biologist, your NRCS biologist, and develop your project and send in a pre-proposal. It's a short, like Tim talked about, the PUB has a short one-page form. It's a short one-page form. It really starts the conversation between the private landowner and their biologist representative and our review committee. And at that point, we go into this back and forth exchange because it's a competitive program. And eventually, if the goals of your project match the goals of the program for that year, then you're selected for funding. But I think a lot of times folks think I have to write the perfect proposal even at the pre-proposal stage because there's a black and white line about what we will and won't fund. And the real truth is that our review committee is looking to fund good projects. And so it becomes a partnership very early on. It's not a hard and fast formal review process. So our priority watersheds for 2019 are the Brazos River Basin, Colorado River Basin, Guadalupe River Basin, and the Rio Grande River Basin. I guess I can walk myself through it here. So when we're selecting projects, special emphasis is placed on projects that offer long-term protection, long-term monitoring, provide location-specific data. That's not a make or break. It's just all these things together, help us sort and rank the projects. show benefit to freshwater mussel species of concern, pollinator species, cost effectiveness, projects that demonstrate efficiency and sustainability. Some of these are pretty obvious, but it gives us all the benchmarks we need when selecting projects. Projects that create corridors, connectivity, and demonstrate long relevance to emerging conservation issues and offer long-term protection. Tim mentioned there's a 10-year maintenance clause in our agreements. For PUB, it's the same with LIP for obvious reasons. I said it a minute ago while I was waiting. We're trying to get the slides to work. We want to have that conversation at any stage, so I've given you our ranking criteria, but don't think any of those things, if you don't meet those, exclude you from the program. Start the conversation. So start to finish in a nutshell. Submit your pre-proposal, review committee talks to you, sends feedback to your biologist about whether this might fit our program for that year. Then you're asked to submit a full proposal. I'm just kind of giving you some timeline ideas here because LIP is not a quick turnaround program. If you need to use this tool or you choose to use this tool, think about something that down the road that you don't need done within 4 or 5 months. Just the planning and strategizing. So projects are usually finished within 1 year to 2 years. Mother Nature, landowner agendas, things factor in, and sometimes we'll give extensions. There's no documentation required as far as getting your reimbursement. You don't have to keep your receipts and give those to us. We do a site visit, and there's a 1-page invoice that you submit to Parks and Wildlife, and the second page, those of us attending the site visit sign off on, and you're reimbursed. So in the back, I left some handouts. I know I was going to try and play a video, but the handouts, I'm sorry. Oh, it's okay. I think we need to probably get going. The newsletter in the back is a great opportunity to show where we showcase our landowner projects. Sometimes the landowners themselves write the articles, and you can hear us talk about the program all day long, but hearing from another landowner is going to be probably a whole lot more effective and insightful. So please pick one of those up. There's all the past issues are on the website. Go to the website. We have links to the blog of one of our cooperators who she chronicled her experiences with a couple of LIP projects. She's very candid about the experience, and I think it's a good resource. And there's a couple of other landowners on there. But essentially, if you're interested in the program, contact your local wildlife biologist, Parners biologist, NRCS, and we would start there. And then I think Chuck needs to get going, and we'll have questions after.
My name is Chuck Kovaleski, and I work for Texas Parks and Wildlife as their liaison between us and federal agencies. And so what I typically do, I'm working on Farm Bill for the most part, and right now it's undergoing a complete rehaul in Congress. But it's amazing what it can do when things come out right, okay? Now, there are different types of Farm Bill Costshare programs. Working lands, easement programs, land retirement, public access, okay, are all the different versions out there. And the Working Lands program comes under a number of different types of programs. The Environmental Quality Incentive Program, the Conservation Stewardship Program, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and the conservation reserves programs of either grassland or transition. Okay, those are the working programs, okay? So what are we talking about? Let's put some reality into this whole thing. The Environmental Quality Incentive Program, or EQIP, is run by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Its main purpose is to reduce the threats to soil, water, and related natural resources. Has a national funding of $1.3 to $1.5 billion per year. Texas annual share is $70 to $80 million per year. And last year we spent $126 million because last year's the Farm Bill that came in 2014 actually allowed the funds to roll over from year to year. So if they weren't used one year, they could be used the next. We also spent about $4 to $5 million in wildlife projects. Okay. Now that's just simply wildlife projects, and there's a lot of other projects that we do out there that also benefit wildlife. So when we take a look at wildlife, this is an NRCS EQIP priority area, and it has most of the wildlife areas on there. The green area over here is antelope. The gray area up in the panhandle on both sides is lesser prairie chicken. The orange area in the top center of the state and then wandering down is bobwhite quail. And we have one on longleaf pine over on East Texas. And those all come together. So 70% of our funds are targeted at livestock, and 80% of EQIP funding goes to local resource concerns. That's where a group of counties puts together a team and decide what's the most important resource concerns they have for their areas. Interestingly enough, quite a few of our local resource agencies actually come up with wildlife as one of the things that they want to work on. 20% goes towards state priority areas, and that's what this map is all about. It's the 20% that the state picks. And $450,000 is the program cap for the 2014 Farm Bill. So that's the third chunk of money that you can use. The National Office may also have targeted resource concerns, and they throw those on top. Just a little icing on the cake, and it doesn't count towards our $80 million. So common EQIP practices include things like residue management, erosion control, water conservation, integrated pest management, nutrient management, and wildlife management. Those are all included. The second program that we were talking about as far as the Working Lands Program is a Conservation Stewardship Program. Its main purpose is to reward environmentally sound land stewardship. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, the land meets stewardship thresholds on two identified environmental resource concerns. I hate all the doggone words they use for it, okay? And achieves a threshold on a third concern by the end of the 5-year contract. So they have a 5-year contract. They already meet 2 of the concerns. Then they work towards a third or more concerns during the rest of the contract. Individual payment cap of $200,000 for the life of the Farm Bill, and expanded to ranch lands, forest lands, as well as croplands in its last one. And it authorizes $10 million per acre per year, and an average cost of $18 an acre. This is a 2014 Farm Bill. I have no idea what the 2018-19 Farm Bill will look like when they get through with it, but a lot of it's looking about the same. The problem with the 18 and 19 Farm Bill is the Senate increased the amount of money in it, and the House cut it out completely and put the money into EQIP. So that makes life just a tad interesting on that, on how it's going to work out as it goes through the process. We have a Regional Conservation Partnership Program, the RCPP, and it's basically leverages working lands, easements, and private funding to produce a measurable environmental results. This actually uses partners' money as well as federal money in doing projects. Eligible activities include habitat conservation, restoration, and enhancement. And I'm working on we're working on one new for this year on the Grassland Restoration Incentive Program, GRIP, run by Oaks and Prairies Joint Venture, where we're actually going to be working on improving habitat for grassland for grassland birds and wildlife. The Grassland Working Lands, CRP Working Grasslands, is actually a brand new program that came out in this Farm Bill, and it puts 2 million acres of CRP as a protected working grasslands from conversion. Grazing, haying, and seed harvesting are permitted. No crop history is required, and that's pretty unusual. If you know anything about CRP, they require a certain amount of crop history, and we'll talk about that later. Eligible land cannot currently have an easement, EQIP, or CSP lifespan contract. It can't have another contract on it. And landowners compete using the Environmental Benefits Index, which is a national ranking process to figure out what state land is in to start with. It requires NRCS conservation planning with primary nesting season deferment. What that means is you can't mess with the ground when there's birds nesting out there. And we have a certain set of times, usually from about March through June or July, depending on if you're haying or grazing it. And it's a 14 to 15-year contract at $15 per acre per year. So you get paid for actually using your land, but you have to use it in a very special way. Easement programs come in two different forms. One is an agricultural land easement program. NRCS works with ag land trusts on pending land sale offers to prevent the loss of working ag lands. So what we've seen is that more and more, especially around urban areas, land is getting gobbled up. And so this is a way that we can help protect it. And it puts a permanent easement on the property. You can see, this is in Texas, that cornfield behind it, okay, is in the process of trying to be sold. NRCS puts up 50% of the cost, and he can even put up 75% of the cost of the market value on grasslands of special environmental significance. And here in Texas, we've basically said those are native grasslands, or grasslands will become native. The landowner and trust donate the remaining 25 to 50%. And permanent easement conditions are set by the land trust. This is a partnership project. So the land trust will own the land or own the easement on the land at the end of the project. The landowner continues to farm or ranch the land. They do not lose the land. And in 2016 and 17, the Texas legislature provided Parks and Wildlife with $2 million as an easement match. So we were able to add actually easement money to this whole process. And that's a problem in this state. We're asking land trusts to put up money, and they don't have it, to be honest with you. They're usually asking the landowners for money to be able to manage a land trust. So this helps out quite a bit. The Wetland Reserve Easement Program restores degraded wetlands and uplands. And you can see this is a beautifully designed wetland. This was a field before, okay? Had been a wetland, being filled, now it's back to a wetland again. Private land has to have a 2-year plus ownership. 30-year or permanent easements the maximum length allowed by the state law, or 30-year contracts for Indian tribes. Allows compatible uses such as hunting, fishing, haying, and grazing. Permanent easements receive 100% of the lowest of the fair market value or geographic rate cap or landowner value. So each part of Texas we have divided into sections. Each section has its own top set of landowner values or geographic rate caps, and up to 100% of the cost of the restoration value. So this is a pretty sweet deal. All right. 30-year easements or contracts receive 75%. Okay. Getting into land retirement programs, now they're retired for a certain period of time typically. The Conservation Reserve Program, we have 3.1 million acres of CRP, and it's primarily in the Panhandle. Okay, and it's worth about $250 million in payments every year. So the main purpose is to remove highly erodible or environmentally sensitive land from production. Farmland must have been in production 4 out of 6 years in the period of 2013 to 2018, and can only enroll during the process of sign-ups. Well, at 2013 to 2018, forget that. It's probably 2011 through it'd be 2010 through 2016. Sorry about that. Can only enroll during announced signups, and 50% of the cost, they pay for 50% of the sharing the costs on establishing the cover. So landowners compete nationally for contracts under CRP, and the scores are based on how the land grades on the Environmental Benefits Index. Native grass plantings receive higher scores than non-native grass. Now that's an interesting statement. For the first 17 sign-ups, we planted non-native grass. Because at the time, basically the CRP setup was basically to just remove land from being planted to a certain crop. okay, and take it out of production for a while. It wasn't until we got a little bit further into this we started noticing all the wildlife using these places, and the ones that had native grass were being used even more. These are 10 to 15-year contracts with an annual rental rate of $25 to $35 an acre. And new sign-ups require mid-contract management practices that benefit the protection of the soil and water, resources, and plant diversity and wildlife. There's also a transition incentive program. That's where if a landowner is either retired or retiring, they can go ahead and transition that CRP over to a beginning, underserved, or military veteran landowner for a good deal. Okay. Continuous CRP conservation buffers targets smaller, environmentally sensitive land which can be enrolled at any time. So on regular CRP, it takes in a whole field. It's only when they make an announcement. Okay, but this one basically can be enrolled at any time. Okay, riparian buffers, windbreaks, filter strips, longleaf pines, crosswind trap strips, shelter belts, grass waterways, buffer strips, field borders, bobwhite buffers, state acres for wildlife. And that's because we set up special state acres for wildlife under continuous CRP, which will include ocelots, prairie chickens, and some others. Okay. And our final program we're going to be talking about is the Voluntary Public Access Program, Habitat Improvement Program. It's where biologists offer private landowners annual lease payments and technical assistance. The opportunities include hunting, fishing, camping, and bird watching. Habitat and location and ease of use are all attributed to scoring it. And the economic considerations include cost, wildlife diversity, and length of available lease. Thank you. Sorry about that. It's a real rush to do the Farm Bill in 15 minutes, okay? Thanks. Be glad to answer anybody's questions. I'll be glad to give anybody cards, okay? So you can contact me anytime you want. Thanks.
Thanks, Chuck. We apologize to everybody for those technical difficulties that slowed us down a little bit, but Chuck's right. The Farm Bill's full, as you saw, of many different diverse programs serving different landowners. Chuck's a phenomenal resource. 3 Farm Bills or 4 Farm Bills you've worked? So going through the 4th Farm Bill now, it changes a little bit every time. The new one's being debated between the House and the Senate. They both pass versions, and they'll hash out what this newest version will end up being. But Chuck's a phenomenal resource for that. If you want to reach out to him, like he said, he's got cards and we're available. If y'all have any questions now about the Parners Fish and Wildlife Program, Landowner Incentive Program, Farm Bill, or Pastures for Upland Birds, we'd be happy to answer them. The question is there a minimum acreage size for the Landowner Incentive Program? Darlene, you want to?
There is no minimum acreage requirement, and in my tenure with the program, I've seen us do an urban lot, which is the smallest we've ever done, protecting a karst feature, to huge, large Trans-Pecos, panhandle landowners. That's not a parameter.
You did bring up a good point that made me think about with the Pastures for Upland Birds program. Most time, unless there's extenuating circumstances like an endangered species area or something like that, typically that project size has a minimum of 25 acres. So, any other questions? Say if there's not, thank y'all for attending today, and we're available afterwards to talk, cards, and so on. Thank you.
Mark your calendar now for next year's Texas Wildlife Association 34th Annual Convention, coming up July 11th through 14th of 2019 in San Antonio. This is a production of Roland Recording.